Hi and welcome to week 3. This week we will be discussing the War of 1812, the Indians and Europeans who settled in Alabama, and the Trail of Tears. War broke out in 1812 between Great Britain and the United States. There were many different issues about settling, making profit, and seeing who had the right to trade. And this is where Andrew Jackson comes out a hero. Some of the important people during this war were President James Madison and Andrew Jackson, who later became the president. During this time, there were a lot of different groups and tribes that had settled in Alabama. Some of the more notable ones are the Creek, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, and the Chickasaw. If you look at this map, you'll notice that the Creek was one of the larger tribes. The Cherokee lived mostly in the northeastern. The Choctaw was one of the most powerful, and the Chickasaw more or less lived in the northwestern part. One of the famous battles that occurred in Alabama was the Creek War. There were two different groups within the Creeks, and one was the Red Sticks, and they did not want the National Council to have too much power, so they were trying to fight against that, and many of the outside groups, like the Americans and the British, were afraid that they would side with either side, so it sort of ended up becoming more than a civil war, but a great war where the British and the Americans were joined in, or the Europeans, and so it became a lot larger than it had to be. Some of the important people during this time were Sam Dale, who fought at the Battle of Fort Mims. And if you'll notice on the map, Fort Mims was very close to Mobile. It was on the southernmost part of Alabama near the Gulf of Mexico. Some of the Europeans that settled in Alabama we discussed last week, but this caused a lot of clash with cultures. You had many that came from Spain or Italy, and we talked about De Soto. We also talked about De Luna and De Pinda. One of the really big parts that we're going to discuss this week too is the Trail of Tears, and many times in Alabama they have a rally with motorcycles that they trace the Trail of Tears, and this meant that all the Indians were removed from the south and they were pushed out west, and they basically followed each other, and many became sick and lost their homes, and some even died, so they call it the Trail of Tears. And these are some of the more important items that we will discuss this week.